All right, thanks everybody for coming together. I know this is a little bit unusual, but rather than try to answer questions from multiple sources, I thought I'd pull everybody together. So, not a formal press conference. I don't have a statement, but I think there are a lot of unanswered questions from the events of yesterday. And so I thought I'd pull everybody together, try to answer some of those questions, and make sure you have the information you need to get the story out to the public. A little bit more unusual than some cases where, yes, this is still an active investigation. And we're still processing stuff, but we're not looking for a suspect. We pretty much think we know what happened, and so I'm not going to be divulging anything that would harm a potential case being presented to the prosecutor in this instance. So a little more open to answering questions you might have about the events that transpired yesterday. So with that, I'm just going to open it up and see what questions you might have. Who wants to start?
Do you know about the time maybe that the children died as a comparison to when you guys went in, or the last time you had contact with him?
You know, we got the call shortly before 8:30 Sunday evening is when we first responded. So roughly 23 hours later is when we went in. Indications from the investigation and preliminary results from the medical examiner's office is that the children were probably killed 24 to 48 hours before we discovered them or before we went in. So short timeline there. Unfortunately, I think the children were dead before we even got the call.
When did you guys believe that at the time? Did you suspect that they were already dead?
We suspected that based on things we learned throughout the investigation, but weren't able to confirm that. You know, there's that point I want to be 100% sure, or at least as close as you can be before we make entry or do something of that nature. So as time went on, you piece things together, and we became more convinced that unfortunately that was the case.
At one point he came out onto the balcony, and you guys had clear sight of him. Why do you not take action at that point? What's going through your heads?
What type of action are you talking about? You know, there's
shooting him, or
yeah. If you're talking specifically about shootings, you know, there are some very clear guidelines on when we utilize deadly force, and simply someone standing out in public with a firearm is not one of those. He never presented the firearm in a threatening manner, pointed at anybody, for example. And he hadn't made any specific threats to anybody, either verbally or otherwise. So it's one of those where standing ready to respond appropriately should that situation present itself, but it didn't. And so the action we took was to continue to negotiate and try to engage him and try to get him to surrender.
Did you find any explosives inside the apartment?
No explosives whatsoever.
Can you tell us how the children died?
They were shot. Move on to somebody else. I'll come back.
Did that change your strategy at all?
Did what? Did what?
Did that change your strategy, knowing that they were probably not alive?
The main difference when you have a situation like this, there's one line of distinction, and that's whether it is a hostage situation or an armed and barricaded situation. And I think that's the major distinction. And when we were, you know, almost certain that unfortunately the children had already been killed, that changed it from a hostage situation trying to negotiate surrender to an armed and barricaded situation, which, you know, well, that's just trying to get that person out and keep everyone else who's outside safe.
At what point did you think that, did you guys come to the realization that you believed the children were already deceased? When did you guys kind of change gears?
I think early on, our negotiators thought that to be the case, but we take every avenue we can to gather information to try to confirm that. So pretty early on, and through some statements, both from the subject and from third-party individuals, but waited until we really could confirm that. And at that point, there's really no reason to rush if we think that to be the case. I think in this case, this individual clearly had a desire for us to do what he ultimately did to himself, and that's not something that we're going to rush into and let him dictate that type of a situation.
Have you had any?
Do you think he took his own life?
It's hard to pinpoint exact time. I'd say all indications of our investigation and the preliminary results sometime during the standoff. Of course, probably, I think he was pretty active contacting people and responding up until about noon yesterday. So probably sometime in that time frame.
Were there people actually in the apartment or on the balcony with him sometime during all of this? Because that, we were
I'm
told there
not
was-
aware of anybody
we were
being
told
there
was a
with him.
woman on the balcony.
Do what?
We were told that there was a woman on the
I,
balcony.
no indication there was anybody else there at any time. The officers who responded initially and set the perimeter did an excellent job of evacuating, getting people out, and so never anybody with him that I'm aware of at all.
Had he been on your radar previously at all?
No. This is unfortunately. I think we talk a lot about family violence, and this is one of those end results of a family situation, and those don't necessarily give rise to any police action or police involvement sometimes until it's too late.
You've seen similar events like this before. What drives someone to do something?
I have absolutely no idea. It is unfathomable to me that a parent would kill their own children, but we see it more often than I'd like to admit that it happens. And as a father myself, I do not understand that, can't understand that, and we'll never know what led him to do this. But I don't think there's any explanation. There's no excuse for it, and it's just simply tragic that when it does happen, people seem to think that's some kind of a solution to problems they're having. Amy?
Chief, did the shooter ever indicate that he had hostages or ever make any threats against other people?
Other people, he referred to the children, and negotiators were talking about the children. In fact, trying to get him to let us talk to the children or some way of letting us see them. So there was constant involvement, discussion about the children being there with him, but never about anybody else.
Did he indicate to officers that he had killed the children?
Never expressly said that to the officers that I'm aware of. No.
Can you talk about the manpower? There were a lot of officers out there from a lot of different departments, and kind of what's the toll that something like this takes on them?
It's always anytime you have a large event, it is a drain on manpower. We're blessed. We have a pretty good sized department. We have a lot of manpower at our disposal, and we're able to utilize people that aren't working. Calling people in early, holding people over late, and managing those resources. But even in a department like ours, at some point you have to ask for help, and in this instance, we did. Our special response team, very well trained and very well conditioned to withstand the rigors of a long deployment like this. But once you get into 10, 12, 14 hours, it's time to do something different. So we work with all area agencies, from the Sheriff's Department, the Highway Patrol, other municipalities on situations like that. And this one called for assistance from an agency like the Highway Patrol. So I can't say enough to thank them for their assistance. We had estimated between 25 and 30 officers that needed to be replaced, our tactical officers. And members of the Highway Patrol were able to step in seamlessly. We kind of held a joint command of the situation after that, but actually replaced every one of our tactical officers with a member of the Highway Patrol's tactical team, and without any interruption in the situation, without any cause for concern by anybody. And I think that worked very well. And then they were able to continue. If this had continued for another 12 hours, we'd have swapped back in at some point. So it really benefits. And I think citizens need to know this, the amount of cooperation, collaboration, and communication we have in this area in Southwest Missouri between all law enforcement agencies, that it's simply, me picking up the phone and calling somebody and getting help. Just like if any of those agencies would have needed help, we'd have done the same thing.
Obviously, you have to be very strategic when you're responding to this kind of a situation, but knowing there were just so many people out there, can you explain why it took so long to finally get in there and see what was going on?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, that when it transitioned simply to an armed and barricaded situation as opposed to a hostage situation, the sense of urgency, in essence, goes away. And we're not going to let the subject dictate our response. So, and in this situation, we were fairly certain that this was not just a person who was potentially suicidal and needed some help, but someone who had potentially killed other people. So that's a murder suspect that needs to be apprehended, and we're not going to leave. So, as I'm sure you heard from some of the announcements, this is the Springfield Police Department, and we're not going anywhere. We're going to stay here, and in essence, we're going to stay there as long as we need to until we can resolve that situation by removing that person from the community and making it safe for everybody to go back there. There was absolutely no way that anyone could have re-entered their apartment or the apartment complex while he was still there. So whether it takes an hour or 24 hours or 72 hours, I appreciate people's patience, I understand their frustration, but it's us about keeping the community safe, and that's the primary goal of all of this in a situation like this.
What would you have done different?
I can't think of anything we would have done differently. I mean, we debriefed last night, debriefed again this morning, and based on my understanding of things now, there was nothing we could have done differently to prevent the tragedy that I think had already occurred.
Can you tell us more about how you deployed the bomb squad and the robots?
It's a unique thing. We contact the fire department. They have some equipment that we don't have, and so we felt that was necessary to utilize their equipment. And once again, just like the help we received from the Highway Patrol, I can't thank the fire department enough for basically dropping what they were doing and coming and helping us. As far as specific tactics and how the equipment was deployed and used, I'm really not at liberty to discuss that. I think it shows not just the need for advanced equipment, but the thankfulness that we have the opportunity to obtain equipment like that and put it to use in the community.
Can you say what the large boom that everyone felt and heard sometime after 6 p.m. last night? Can you say what that was?
Yeah, that was us making entry into the apartment.
Chief, you mentioned that the suspect wasn't just a suicidal person, that was a murder suspect. At any point, was he making suicidal comments to the negotiators, or did you have an indication he might try to provoke kind of a suicide by cop situation?
Yes, I think he made comments about ending it and it's not going to end well. And now, did he specifically say, I'm going to kill myself? I'm not aware of that type of comment to negotiators, but I think it was throughout. There was concern that he not only was going to move in that direction, but that he was wanting us to do that for him at some point. And there's absolutely no reason for us to rush into that and make that happen. Our efforts were to prevent that from occurring. And suspect or not, our goal is to remove people from a situation and without anybody being hurt or killed.
Do your tactics change when you're dealing with somebody who has former law enforcement experience?
Tactics don't change. Our sense of awareness. Sometimes we don't know who this person is. We knew who this person was early on and knew that he was a former law enforcement officer and that he had a variety of weapons and maybe some training. So that's as we gather information on any instance, that's always useful to have. So maybe I don't think the tactics change, but the sense of what we're up against, that awareness certainly does help.
How many guns did you find in there?
I don't recall exactly how many guns were recovered.
Yeah, what kind of equipment did he have? We were hearing he may have been someone really prepared for things. What kind of equipment, weapons?
Handguns, rifles, ammunition, generally. Nothing
gas
nothing
mask?
out of the ordinary. Excuse me.
Did he have a gas mask?
No, not at all. That I'm aware of. No.
Had there been any type of previous domestic disturbance at this residence, or was this just completely something out of the blue?
No. No history. I'm sorry. Major McCullough's correct me. We had one previous call there. Okay, thank you. At that residence.
At what points were residents allowed back into their apartments?
That's after we were done. I mean, at no point were we able to allow anybody. It's just not safe, especially as was mentioned earlier. We have a subject who's out on a balcony, on a second floor balcony with a rifle. Now he didn't bring it up and point at anybody, but certainly could have happened in a split second. So, we tried to remove people as far away as we could and them still be okay with that. But there's a long area of potential lethality when you have a rifle like that. So absolutely no way we could let anybody back into the apartment complex or that portion of the complex while he was still active and engaged and the situation was unfolding. Once when we made entry, once we discovered that he was dead, the threat is gone, and then we reduced the size of the perimeter back to now it's processing a crime scene, and so anybody that could be allowed back in who now there's no danger, but still kept us till about 5:30, 6 o'clock this morning when we finished processing the crime scene, and then basically opened everything back up to everybody.
And when do you believe that he killed himself? Do we have a time frame at all?
Certainly, sometime yesterday, I think I said earlier, our last contact with him was midday, around noon. So probably sometime in between then and when we went in, that happened, and we don't know for sure. Waiting on those final results from the medical examiner and the autopsies that are being performed today.
There wasn't a gunshot that somebody knew for sure?
No, it could have happened when we made entry. It could have happened when tear gas was deployed. It could have happened any number of times in there where a single gunshot in an enclosed environment like that, that we just didn't hear it at the time. So we don't know for sure.
The decision to make entry when you did, was that calculation based on how long it had been since you had contact with him?
Yeah, all those things. How long it had been since we had contact, the additional information we were able to gather from our investigation and from speaking with people. Just a lot of things went into that, and developing a really good rail-safe tactical plan that at that point, keeping the officers safe. We removed the citizens from the situation, and the second thing is keeping the officers safe when they're making entry. And I think we were able to do that very well. And yes, that takes time. I understand frustration from folks being out, but at that point, we're going to take as long as we need to take to make sure that everybody is safe and the situation is resolved as best we can.
We were hearing from family that he'd been diagnosed with a brain tumor. Do you know if he talked to negotiators about that, or if that?
Absolutely no information about that at all.
Can you say if the children were in their beds or anything like that?
I'm not going to talk about where they were or anything else, just they were found in the apartment. They were both deceased, and they'd both been shot.
Chief, can you go back over, because this is something that a lot of people brought up, why did officers not take a shot? Can you just kind of reiterate the police department's sort of threshold for when officers would potentially take a shot at somebody?
Sure.
And national standard.
The police department's threshold matches the law, and we probably go to a higher standard. But there are some very specific parameters, and using deadly force is not something that we want to do or that we do quickly. So in this situation, if the subject had threatened someone or pointed his weapon at a citizen or an officer while he was outside, as has been reported out on the balcony, then I have no doubt, no qualms, we would have taken the chance to shoot that person and end the threat. But I have no indication he did that, nor did the officers at the scene ever give any indication he did that. He was armed with a weapon, sometimes with a handgun, sometimes with a rifle, but he never brought it up, aimed it at anybody, or said, I'm going to shoot somebody. So I think the officers stood ready to take that action, but did not have to do that.
And at that point, you believe that the hostages were not alive?
That's my personal belief and firm belief that they had already been killed before we got the call.
Did any neighbors report hearing gunshots the day before or anything?
No, not that I'm aware of. Yes, ma'am.
What have you all learned from this incident?
What have we learned? I think we, department-wise, I think there's a reason we train how we do and why we have specialized tactical people and negotiators, and they performed admirably throughout this entire ordeal. I think as far as cooperation with other law enforcement agencies and other agencies in particular. Learn there's a reason why we communicate and work so well together when crises aren't occurring. I think we learned there's a level of cooperation from the public and businesses as well that maybe people aren't aware of. I think the apartment owner and everybody associated with that on the outside did a great job of working with the residents and working with people there to make them as comfortable and help them out throughout this long ordeal. And then finally, I think it's a tragic event that I certainly wish I could prevent. We could do something to prevent in the future. I think it drives home that fact that if someone has decided and is focused on doing something of this nature, there's really nothing any of us can do to prevent it. It's respond as quickly as we can, keep everybody safe, and try to resolve it peacefully.
Will this change the way you deal with stand-up situations in the future?
No, I think we've done, like I said, a couple debriefs. We'll do a very thorough debrief, and we'll see. We'll revise everything we did and how we did. And there's always, good to critique yourself, meet with other folks, and critique that. But my preliminary review is, man, everything from our standpoint, how the police responded. We did everything we could and did it to the best of our ability. And as I said, the officers performed admirably. I think some even above and beyond. Everybody focuses on the tactical aspect, but we had officers out there in a role that people maybe don't normally see them, being empathetic and caring and sympathetic, and officers who interacted with family members and continued, just as we had tactical folks on point for 12 or 14 hours, officers engaged with family and friends for that same amount of time. I couldn't be prouder of the way that all the officers in Springfield Police Department responded in this ordeal.
Is there a comparison in terms of the length of time everyone was out there in terms of past events, or is this really unique?
It's pretty unique. Talking about that this morning, I think we have to go back 15 years, Major?
That's correct.
About 15 years to anything that lasted this long in this community. And so it is. It's unique. It's not the norm. But I think people should rest assured that when these things do happen, it doesn't matter if it doesn't happen very often. That's the things we train for and are able to handle them appropriately. Anybody else?
Chief, again, you said there were some preliminary autopsy reports at this point. Can you give us, and the children have both been shot, one time each with the kids and the suspect? Or?
Yes, preliminary. I mean, I didn't ask those questions. I'm going to wait for the medical examiner, but I tried to get some specifics to share with you. Yes, they'd been shot. Yes, 24 to 48 hours probably prior to the incident, and the suspect too also had been shot, apparently self-inflicted.
Can you say 24 to 48 hours before you discovered them, or before this all began?
Let's say 24 to 40 hours before we discovered them is the timeline, so that would back it up to before we got the initial call at the earliest point.
Possibly a whole day.
Yes.
And can you clarify on the previous call that came from that residence at some point before this whole ordeal? You said what was the nature of that call?
Major McCullough, I'm sorry, I didn't have
I
that.
believe it was a domestic, and it had been a few months ago.
Okay, between this subject and his
The mother of the children.
the mother of the children, okay, at that apartment.
Yes.
And I apologize, I didn't have that information before I walked in here. But if you want more on that, we can get you more on that.
How frequently were the negotiators in contact with the suspect during that time frame?
Pretty constant. I mean, it's either through loudspeaker, bullhorn, phone call. They were in and out of contact with him throughout the ordeal, like I said, up until, my recollection is up until about 11 or 12 o'clock on Monday. Okay, thank you very much for coming. I appreciate your attendance.